I found a storage unit key hidden in my wife's jewelry box. When I opened that unit, what I discovered shattered 35 years of marriage. But what I did next made her beg for mercy in front of the entire country club. I'm so grateful you're here watching this. Please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story travels. I sat in my leather chair in the study, the room dimly lit by the antique lamp Margaret had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. The house felt different that evening, empty somehow, despite Margaret being upstairs in our bedroom. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked its steady rhythm, each sound a heartbeat of a life I thought I knew completely. My wife Margaret had just returned from another one of her charity committee meetings. She looked exhausted, her makeup slightly smudged, her hair falling loose from the elegant bun she always wore. There was something different about her lately, a distance, a coldness that had crept into our marriage like frost on a window. "Robert, I'm absolutely drained," she said, kicking off her heels in the foyer. "The foundation gala planning is killing me. I'm going straight to bed." I nodded from my chair, watching her climb the stairs without even asking about my day, without the goodnight kiss that had been our ritual for decades. The silk scarf around her neck caught my attention. It was new, expensive, not something from our usual department stores. An hour later, I heard her soft snoring through the ceiling. I set down my book and decided to make myself some tea. As I passed through the foyer, I noticed her purse had tipped over, its contents spilling across the marble floor. Lipstick, compact mirror, wallet, and something else. A small velvet jewelry box I'd never seen before. Curiosity pulled me forward. I picked up the box and opened it. Inside was a beautiful diamond bracelet, the kind that cost more than a car. My heart sank. I hadn't bought her this. Our 35th anniversary was still months away. Where had this come from? I gathered her things, placing them back in her purse. But as I did, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic tucked into the inner pocket. I pulled it out. A key. Not a house key or a car key. It was one of those storage unit keys with a number stamped on it. Unit 247, secure safe storage, with an address across town. My hands began to tremble. Margaret had never mentioned a storage unit. In our entire marriage, we'd shared everything. Our finances, our investments, our dreams. Why would she need a secret storage unit? I stood there in the foyer, the key cold in my palm, feeling the first crack in the foundation of my world. Part of me wanted to put it back, to pretend I'd never seen it. But another part, the part that had noticed her late nights, her secretive phone calls, her new expensive jewelry, that part needed to know the truth. I carefully placed the key back in her purse and returned to my study. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. At 3 a.m, I made a decision. Tomorrow, while Margaret was at her charity luncheon, I would visit that storage unit. The next day crawled by like a wounded animal. I went through the motions at my architectural firm, reviewing blueprints, meeting with clients, but my mind was elsewhere. At noon, I told my assistant I had an off-site meeting and drove across town to secure safe storage. The facility was one of those bland industrial complexes with rows of identical orange doors. I parked my car and sat there for 10 minutes, the key in my hand, my heart pounding. This felt like a violation of trust, but then again, what was the storage unit if not a violation itself? I found Unit 247 on the second floor. The hallway smelled of concrete and motor oil. My hand shook as I inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door rolled up with a metallic screech that echoed in the corridor. Inside was a 10 by 10 space, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The unit was furnished like a small apartment. There was a love seat, a coffee table, soft lighting from a lamp plugged into the wall outlet, but it was what covered the walls that destroyed me. Photographs. Dozens of them. Margaret with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, embracing, kissing. In some photos, they were at restaurants I knew she'd told me were charity events. In others, they were at beaches we'd never visited together, mountains we'd never climbed. I stepped inside, my legs weak. On the coffee table was a laptop. I opened it. No password. The screen lit up with a document titled Our Future. I began to read, and each word was a knife to my heart. It was a detailed plan. Margaret and this man, whoever he was, were planning to drain our joint accounts, sell our properties through a series of fraudulent transactions, and disappear together. The document outlined how they would use my power of attorney, which I'd given Margaret years ago for convenience, to transfer everything into offshore accounts. There were bank statements showing transfers I'd never authorized, legal documents with forged signatures, my signature. They'd been siphoning money from our accounts for over a year, hundreds of thousands of dollars, money from the business I'd built from nothing, money from the properties we'd invested in together. I sat down on the love seat, my head in my hands. 35 years. We'd built a life together, raised 2 children, supported each other through illnesses, losses, triumphs. Or so I thought. Now I realized it had all been a performance, at least on her end. I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures. Every photograph on the wall, every page of that document, every bank statement, the laptop screen. I documented everything with the methodical precision of an architect measuring a building site. Then I found the box. It was tucked behind the love seat. A simple cardboard box filled with burner phones, fake IDs, with Margaret's photo but different names, and a stack of love letters. I opened one, my hands trembling. My darling Marcus. It began in Margaret's flowing handwriting. Only 3 more months until Robert signs the final property transfer. Then we'll be free. Free to start our life in Costa Rica. Free from his boring dinner conversations, his predictable routines, his complete lack of passion. You've awakened something in me I thought was dead. I couldn't read anymore. Marcus. The name finally had a face from the photos. He was younger than me, maybe by 10 years. Handsome in a slick, used car salesman way. The kind of man who wore too much cologne and smiled with too many teeth. I photographed the letters, the IDs, the phones, everything. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I turned off the lamp, rolled down the door, and locked it. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot and called the only person I trusted completely, my brother James, an attorney who specialized in fraud cases. "James," I said when he answered, my voice barely steady, "I need your help, and I need a private investigator. The best you know." James met me at a coffee shop an hour later. I showed him everything on my phone, the photos, the documents, the evidence of the systematic theft of my assets. His face grew darker with each image. "Robert, this is serious," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just infidelity. This is fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. Margaret could go to prison for this." "Good," I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. James made a call right there at the coffee shop. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Chin, a private investigator who looked like a librarian but had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, reviewing my evidence on her tablet, "I'm going to be honest with you. Your wife and her boyfriend have been very careful, but they've also been arrogant. That storage unit is their mistake. People who commit fraud always keep trophies of their crimes. They can't help themselves." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "You go home. Act normal. Don't let her know you suspect anything. Meanwhile, I'll put together a complete dossier. I'll follow them, document everything, get audio recordings if possible. I'll trace every dollar they've stolen, and when we have everything we need, we'll drop it on her like an avalanche." That night was the hardest of my life. I returned home to find Margaret in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing was wrong. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, asked about my day. I wanted to scream, to confront her right there, but I remembered Patricia's words, act normal. "How was the charity luncheon?" I asked, sitting at the kitchen table. Exhausting as always," Margaret sighed, stirring a pot of soup. "Claire is impossible to work with. She wants ice sculptures at the gala. Ice sculptures in August. She was so good at this, so convincing. I wondered how many times she'd come home from being with Marcus and lied to my face with that same smile. "Sounds challenging," I said, my voice even. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." She beamed at me, and I felt sick. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I met with James and Patricia, reviewing the evidence they were gathering. Patricia had placed tracking devices on Margaret's car. She'd hired additional investigators to follow Marcus. She'd even gotten warrants, with James's help, to access their phone records and emails. The picture that emerged was devastating. Margaret and Marcus had been together for almost 3 years. They'd met at a fundraiser where Marcus was a caterer. He was a con artist with a history of seducing wealthy women and stealing from them. Margaret was just his latest mark, except she'd become an active participant in the scheme. They had secret credit cards and fake names. They'd rented an apartment together where they met twice a week. They'd already purchased a villa in Costa Rica under an LLC they'd created. The plan was to make one final massive transfer of funds, then disappear while I was supposed to be on a business trip to Seattle next month. Patricia even managed to get audio recordings. One was from the storage unit, where Margaret and Marcus had apparently made it a habit to meet and review their plans. "He's so trusting," Margaret's voice said on the recording, laughing. "Robert never questions anything. I could tell him I'm going to the moon and he'd just nod and ask what time I'll be home." Marcus laughed too. "That's what makes this so easy, babe, but also kind of sad. The guy's devoted to you." "Devoted and boring," Margaret replied. "I'm ready for excitement, for passion, for a life that isn't scheduled down to the minute." Listening to that recording, sitting in Patricia's office, I felt something break inside me. The woman I'd loved for 35 years didn't exist. She never had. This cruel, greedy stranger had worn her face all along. "I want to destroy them," I told James and Patricia, "completely." Patricia smiled. "Then let's give them exactly what they deserve." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would let them think they were succeeding. James created a fake property deed for a commercial building I supposedly owned in Portland. The building was real, valuable, worth about $8 million, but I didn't own it. James had friends in Portland who were willing to participate in the sting operation. I came home one evening and accidentally left the deed on my desk in the study. I made sure Margaret saw it when she brought me tea. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up with perfectly performed curiosity. "Oh, that," I said casually. "I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. I invested in a commercial property in Portland 6 months ago. It's quadrupled in value. I was planning to sell it and use the money to take you on that European river cruise you've always wanted, for our anniversary." Her eyes widened. I could see her mind calculating. $8 million. The final score they needed. "Robert, that's wonderful," she said, kissing me. Her lips felt like ice. "But you should have told me. We're partners." "You're right," I said, taking her hand. "Actually, I need you to come to Portland next week. There's some paperwork that needs both our signatures for the sale. Some tax advantage thing. James explained it, but honestly, it went over my head." "Of course," she said quickly. Too quickly. I'd love to come. That night, I heard her on the phone in the bathroom, whispering urgently. The next morning, Patricia confirmed that Margaret had called Marcus immediately. They'd already started planning how to steal the Portland property money. The next week was theater.
I played the loving husband preparing for a romantic trip. I booked flights, made hotel reservations at an expensive resort, even arranged for flowers to be delivered to our room. Margaret played the devoted wife, excited for our getaway. What she didn't know was that Patricia had arranged for every moment to be documented. There were cameras in the storage unit now, recording every meeting between Margaret and Marcus. There were audio recordings of their phone calls. James had even gotten a court order freezing all the fraudulent accounts they'd created, although they didn't know it yet. The day before our trip to Portland, Margaret went to the storage unit. Patricia called me with a live feed. I watched on my phone as Margaret and Marcus celebrated, drinking champagne, kissing, reviewing their final plans. "This is it, baby," Marcus said. "After tomorrow, we're set for life. That idiot is going to sign over everything, and we'll be in Costa Rica before he realizes what happened." Margaret laughed. "I almost feel bad. Almost. But then I remember how boring he is, how predictable, how he never surprised me, never excited me. He deserves this for being so blind." I turned off the phone. I'd heard enough.
The night before our Portland trip, I told Margaret I needed to run to the office to grab some documents for the property sale. "Don't stay too long," she said, kissing my cheek. "We have an early flight." "I won't," I promised. Instead of going to the office, I went to our country club. James had arranged everything. The club's event coordinator, a woman named Sandra, who'd known our family for years, had agreed to help. She was disgusted when James told her what Margaret had been doing. In the club's grand ballroom, we set up a presentation screen and a sound system. Sandra helped me send personal invitations to every member of the club, all our friends, all the people Margaret had worked with on charity committees. The invitations said there would be an important announcement about the upcoming gala, and Margaret would be presenting. Margaret knew nothing about it. The next morning, instead of going to the airport, I told Margaret there was a last-minute change of plans. "The Portland deal is delayed by a day," I said, "but Sandra called. There's an emergency meeting at the club about the gala. She needs you there. Something about the caterer canceling." Margaret looked annoyed, but agreed. "Fine, but this better be quick. We need to reschedule our flights." We drove to the country club in separate cars. Margaret went ahead while I waited, following 15 minutes later. When I arrived, the parking lot was full. Everyone had come. I walked into the ballroom through the back entrance. Sandra had seated Margaret at the front table, the place of honor. She was talking to friends, laughing, completely unaware. The room was filled with everyone we knew. Our neighbors, our business associates, people from church, members of all her charity committees. I took my place at the podium. Sandra dimmed the lights and turned on the projector. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice amplified through the sound system. The room fell silent. "I know the invitation mentioned the gala, but I'm afraid I wasn't entirely truthful. I've gathered you here today to share something important about someone we all know very well." Margaret looked confused, then concerned. She half rose from her seat. "Robert, what are you doing?" "Sit down, Margaret," I said calmly. "Everyone deserves to hear this." The first image appeared on the screen. Margaret and Marcus kissing at a restaurant. The room gasped. Margaret went pale. "This is Marcus Delgado. For the past 3 years, he's been my wife's lover, but their relationship isn't just about infidelity, it's about theft." Click. The next image. Bank statements showing the transfers. Margaret and Marcus have been systematically stealing from our joint accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Click. The legal documents with forged signatures. They forged my signature on multiple occasions to transfer property and assets. Click. The fake IDs and passports. They created false identities and were planning to flee the country next week with everything they'd stolen. Margaret stood up, her face red. "This is insane. Robert, you're having some kind of breakdown. These are lies."
I pressed play on an audio file. Her voice filled the ballroom crystal clear. "He's so trusting. Robert never questions anything. I could tell him I'm going to the moon, and he'd just nod and ask what time I'll be home." Marcus's voice responded, "That's what makes this so easy, babe." The room erupted. Women gasped. Men muttered angrily. I saw our friends' faces contort with shock and disgust. Devoted and boring. I'm ready for excitement, for passion, for a life that isn't scheduled down to the minute. I stopped the audio. Margaret was crying now, mascara running down her face. She looked around the room desperately, seeing only judgment and contempt. "How could you?" shouted Claire, her supposed best friend from the charity committee. "We trusted you with foundation money." "Oh, God," Sandra whispered, covering her mouth. "The gala funds." I nodded. Patricia Chen, the private investigator I hired, discovered that Margaret also embezzled $50,000 from the gala fund. It was supposed to pay for the venue and catering. She transferred it to one of her secret accounts 3 weeks ago. The room exploded. Voices overlapped in anger and disbelief. Margaret collapsed into her chair, sobbing. I clicked to the final slide. The villa in Costa Rica. "This is the property Margaret and Marcus bought with stolen money. Our money. Your charity money. They plan to disappear there next week and live off what they'd stolen." I turned off the projector and looked at Margaret. She was destroyed. Her carefully cultivated reputation gone in minutes. Every friendship, every social connection, burned to ash. "How could I?" I said quietly, answering her earlier question. "How could you, Margaret? 35 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built together, and you were willing to throw it all away for that?" I pulled out a folder from the podium. "These are divorce papers. My attorney will be in touch about the criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. Patricia has already turned over all evidence to the district attorney." I walked toward the exit, then paused. "Oh, and everyone should know that all the stolen funds have been recovered and frozen by court order. The charity will get its money back. Margaret and Marcus won't see a dime." As I left, the room erupted behind me. I could hear voices yelling at Margaret, demanding explanations. Her sobs echoed through the hallway.
The scandal consumed our town. By evening, everyone knew. The local news picked up the story. Prominent socialite caught in elaborate fraud scheme. Margaret's face was on every television, every website. Marcus was arrested that same afternoon when he showed up at the storage unit, unaware that police were waiting. He tried to run, but didn't get far. Patricia had called it perfectly. Margaret was arrested at home that night. I watched from my brother's house as police led her out in handcuffs. Neighbors stood on their lawns, watching. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked disgusted. The legal process was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Margaret's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney was aggressive. Fraud, embezzlement from a charity, identity theft. The charges piled up. My children, Emily and David, both in their late 20s, flew home immediately. They were devastated. They'd looked up to their mother their entire lives. "How could we not see it?" Emily cried in my arms. "How could she lie to all of us for so long?" "Because she's very good at lying," I said quietly. "Better than any of us realized." David was angry. "Dad, I'm so sorry. We should have noticed something was wrong." "No one noticed," I said. "That's not your fault. It's hers." The trial took 3 months. I attended every day, sitting in the front row, forcing Margaret to see me. She'd broken down on the witness stand, claiming she'd been manipulated by Marcus, that she'd never meant for things to go so far. But the evidence contradicted her. The letters in her handwriting, the recordings of her mocking me, the careful planning documented in that storage unit.
Marcus testified against her, trying to reduce his own sentence. He claimed Margaret had initiated everything, that she'd seduced him into the scheme. More lies, but they damaged her case further. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd known Margaret socially from the country club. Her face was stern as she delivered the sentence. "Mrs. Widmore, you violated every trust placed in you. You betrayed your husband, your family, your friends, and the charitable organizations you pretended to serve. Your actions were calculated, cruel, and motivated purely for greed. I'm sentencing you to 12 years in federal prison." Margaret collapsed. Her attorney had to hold her up. As guards led her away, she looked back at me one last time. I felt nothing. The woman I'd loved was gone. This stranger wearing her face deserved everything she got. Marcus received 15 years. His criminal history and the fact that he targeted multiple victims before Margaret made his sentence harsher. 6 months after the trial, I stood in my remodeled study. I'd changed almost everything in the house. New furniture, new paint colors, new everything. I couldn't live surrounded by reminders of the lie I'd been living. Emily and David visited often. We'd grown closer through the ordeal. They'd both apologized repeatedly for not seeing what was happening, though I kept telling them it wasn't their fault. "Dad, have you thought about dating?" Emily asked one Sunday over dinner. "You're still young. You deserve to be happy." I smiled. "Maybe someday. Right now I'm focusing on work and spending time with you two, and maybe future grandchildren." Emily blushed. She and her boyfriend had just gotten engaged. Something good coming from all this darkness. My architectural firm had thrived. Clients respected how I handled the situation with dignity. Several major projects had come my way. I'd even hired 3 new architects and was considering opening a second office. The charity gala that Margaret had stolen from eventually happened 6 months late. I'd donated extra money to make up for the delays and hassles. Sandra asked me to speak at the event. "I want to thank everyone for their patience and understanding during a difficult time," I said to the assembled crowd. Many of the same people who'd been at the country club for the confrontation. What happened was a betrayal of trust, but it taught me something important. Real community isn't just about donations and events. It's about how we support each other when things fall apart. The applause was genuine. Afterwards, several women approached me, some making it clear they'd be interested in coffee or dinner sometime. I was polite, but non-committal. I wasn't ready yet. Patricia Chen had become a friend. We met for lunch occasionally, and she told me stories about other cases she'd worked on. Nothing as dramatic as mine, she claimed, though I suspected she was being modest. "You handled it perfectly," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "A lot of people would have just confronted their spouse immediately. They would have lost all the evidence. I couldn't have done it without you and James." "True," she grinned, "but you kept your cool. That takes strength." James helped me finalize the divorce even while Margaret was in prison. She'd signed everything without contesting. What was the point? She had nothing to fight for. The house was officially mine. The business was mine, the savings, investments, everything. I'd offered to split some assets with Emily and David as their inheritance early, but they'd refused. "Keep it, Dad," David said. "Build something new. Live your life. We're doing fine." 1 year after the trial, I received a letter. Prison mail. Margaret's handwriting. I almost threw it away without reading it. Emily and David both advised me to. But curiosity won out. I opened it in my study, the new study that bare no trace of the old life. "Dear Robert," it began. "I know I have no right to write to you, no right to expect you to read this, but I need to say things I should have said a long time ago. I'm sorry. I know those words are meaningless after what I did, but I need to say them anyway. I'm sorry for betraying you, for stealing from you, for mocking me, for throwing away 35 years of marriage for something so worthless. You were a good husband, better than I deserved. You were kind, faithful, supportive. You built a life for us. You gave me everything I asked for, and I repaid you with lies and theft. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that every day in here, I regret what I did. Not because I got caught, but because I destroyed something real for something fake. Marcus was a fantasy. The stolen money was a fantasy. The idea of running away to Costa Rica was a fantasy. I got lost in the fantasy and forgot what was real. You, our children, our life together. I was bored. Robert, that's not an excuse, just an explanation. I wanted excitement and passion, and instead of talking to you about it, instead of working on our marriage, I threw it away. I thought the problem was you. Now I know the problem was me. You'll probably never read this. If you do, I don't expect a response. I just needed to tell you that you were right to do what you did. You were right to expose me, right to divorce me, right to send me to prison. I earned all of it. I hope you're happy. I hope you find someone who deserves you. Someone who sees what I was too blind to see. Margaret. I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hand. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction. She was suffering. She regretted everything. Wasn't that what I'd wanted? But I felt only emptiness. Her apology didn't change anything. It didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't give me back the years I'd wasted trusting her. It was just words on paper from someone who'd proven words meant nothing. I put the letter in a drawer and never responded. There was nothing to say.
2 years after the trial, I went on my first real date. Her name was Catherine, a widow I'd met through the architectural firm. She was a client who'd hired us to design her dream home after her husband passed away from cancer. We'd started as friends, meeting for coffee to discuss the project. Then the conversations had shifted from floor plans to life stories. She was honest about her grief, about the challenges of moving forward after loss. I found myself being honest too, about the betrayal, about learning to trust again. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, I admitted over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant, our first official date. Catherine smiled. I'm not sure I am either, but we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Let's just enjoy the lasagna. I laughed. It felt good to laugh. We took it slow, very slow, but over the next year, something real developed. Not a fantasy, not a passionate whirlwind, just something steady and genuine, something built on honesty. Emily and David liked her. She makes you happy, Dad, Emily said after Catherine joined us for a family dinner. We can see it in your eyes. I hadn't told Catherine I loved her yet. The word felt too loaded, too dangerous. But I cared about her. I trusted her. Maybe that was enough for now. The business continued to grow. We opened that second office. I promoted one of my associates to partner. I started mentoring young architects at the local university. Life had purpose again. I still thought about Margaret sometimes. Not with love, not even with hate anymore. Just with a kind of sad bewilderment. How had she thrown everything away? What had she been thinking? I saw a photo of her once in a news article about prison reform programs. She looked older, smaller, diminished. The glamorous socialite was gone. In her place was a middle-aged woman in prison khakis, her hair gray, her face lined. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity. She was a stranger who'd once worn the face of someone I loved. 3 years after the trial, Patricia called me. Robert, you should know that the storage unit is being cleared out. Secure Safe is finally closing down that facility. They're auctioning off abandoned units. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because Unit 247 technically was rented under one of Margaret's fake names. The rental company doesn't know about the trial. It's going to be sold with all its contents if someone doesn't claim it.
I thought about it for a moment. Let it go. I don't want any of it. Are you sure? Patricia asked. There might be things in there worth keeping. Photos of your kids when they were young, family mementos. She had a point. I drove out to the storage facility one last time. It looked different in daylight, less ominous. Just a building. Unit 247 was still there, unchanged. I opened it with the key I'd kept in my desk drawer. The love seat, the coffee table, the photographs on the walls. Everything frozen in time, a monument to betrayal. I started going through boxes, separating what was evidence of the crime from what was actually personal. And Patricia was right. There were photos of Emily and David from family vacations, pictures from our early years of marriage when things were still good, a jewelry box with earrings I'd given Margaret for our 10th anniversary. I packed those things carefully, taking only what belonged to the real memories, the real life we had before everything went wrong. As I was loading the last box into my car, a young couple walked by, looking at units for rent. This one's going to be available soon, the facility manager was telling them. Perfect size for storage or even a workshop. A workshop. The irony made me smile. The place where Margaret had workshopped her betrayal would become someone's honest workspace. I drove home with the boxes in my trunk. That evening, Emily and David came over. We went through the contents together, laughing at old photos, remembering better times. You know, David said, holding a picture of Margaret and me at his high school graduation, I think I'm ready to remember the good parts, not just the end. Emily nodded. Mom made terrible choices, but she was still our mom for a lot of years before that. I looked at the photo. Margaret and I were smiling, proud parents. That moment was real. Whatever came after, that moment was real. I saw a photo of her once, in a news article about prison reform programs. She looked older, smaller, diminished. The glamorous socialite was gone. In her place was a middle-aged woman in prison khakis, her hair gray, her face lined. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity. She was a stranger who'd once worn the face of someone I loved. 5 years after the trial, I stood in the parking lot of the federal prison. Catherine was in the car, reading a book, giving me space. I told her I needed to do this alone, and she'd understood. Margaret had served 5 years of her 12-year sentence. She'd been a model prisoner, according to the warden. She taught GED classes to other inmates. She worked in the prison library. She'd earned early parole consideration. I'd been asked to give a statement at her parole hearing. Emily and David had declined, not ready to face their mother. I almost declined too, but something made me say yes. The hearing was in a small room with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs. Margaret sat at a table with her attorney. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. She looked so different. Older, thinner, broken. The parole board asked me to speak. 5 years ago, Margaret Whitmore destroyed my life. She betrayed my trust, stole my assets, and planned to disappear, leaving me with nothing. The evidence of her crimes was overwhelming. The court sentenced her appropriately. I paused, looking at Margaret. She was crying silently. But I'm not here to argue against her parole. I'm here to say that people can change. I don't know if Margaret has changed. I don't know if she's genuinely remorseful or just tired of prison. That's not for me to judge. The board members leaned forward, listening. But I want to be clear. My statement is not forgiveness. It's release. I'm releasing the anger, the bitterness, the desire for revenge. Not for her. For me. Because carrying that weight is exhausting, and I'm done carrying it. I sat down. The board asked Margaret some questions. She answered with what seemed like genuine remorse. She talked about the therapy she'd received in prison, about facing what she'd done, about the shame she carried every day. I don't expect Robert to forgive me, she said, her voice shaking. I don't expect my children to want to see me. I just want a chance to live quietly, to work an honest job, to maybe someday be someone they wouldn't be ashamed of. The hearing ended. I left without speaking to Margaret directly. What would I say? There were no words left between us. 3 weeks later, I received notification that Margaret had been granted parole with strict conditions. She'd be released in 30 days, required to live in a houseway house, maintain employment, and have no contact with me or our children unless we initiated it. I told Emily and David over dinner. "How do you feel about it, Dad?" Emily asked. "Honestly, I feel nothing. She's a stranger now. What she does with her second chance doesn't affect me anymore." David nodded slowly. "Maybe someday I'll want to see her, talk to her, but not now. Not for a long time." "That's fair," I said. "We all heal at our own pace."
The spring after Margaret's release, Catherine and I got married. It was a small ceremony in her backyard, just family and close friends. Emily was my best woman. David walked Catherine down the aisle, a gesture that made her cry happy tears. Patricia Chen was there, grinning from the second row. "You know," she told me at the reception, "of all my cases, yours had the best ending." "How so?" I asked. "Most people who get betrayed like you did, they never recover. They become bitter, suspicious, closed off. But look at you. You're happy. You found love again. You didn't let what happened define you." I looked across the yard, where Catherine was laughing with Emily. I almost did become that bitter person. But I realized that Margaret already took enough from me. I wasn't going to let her take my future, too. James raised a toast. To Robert and Catherine. To second chances and new beginnings. Everyone cheered. I felt lighter than I had in years. That summer, Emily announced she was pregnant, my first grandchild. David got engaged to his girlfriend of 2 years. Life was moving forward, leaving the darkness of the past further and further behind. Catherine and I traveled. We went to Italy, to France, to places Margaret and I had always talked about but never visited. I realized I was doing all the things I'd postponed during my marriage, all the adventures I'd put off because Margaret preferred charity galas and country club events. "Do you ever think about her?" Catherine asked one evening as we watched the sunset from our hotel balcony in Tuscany. "Sometimes," I admitted, but not with pain anymore, more like curiosity. I wonder if she's doing okay, if she found honest work, if she's building a real life." "That's very gracious of you," Catherine said. I shook my head. "It's not grace. It's just acceptance. What happened, happened. I can't change it. I can only choose how I move forward." 7 years after the trial, I was at the grocery store when I saw her. Margaret. She was wearing a simple uniform from the store, stocking shelves in the cereal aisle. Her hair was gray now, cut short. She wore no makeup. She looked like someone's grandmother, not the glamorous socialite she'd once been. She saw me at the same time. Her face went pale, her hands trembled. A box of cereal fell from her grip and hit the floor. "Robert," she whispered. I stood there, my shopping cart between us like a barrier. Catherine was waiting in the car. I could just walk away. I probably should walk away. But something made me stay. "Hello, Margaret," I said quietly. I work here now," she said unnecessarily, gesturing at her uniform. "It's honest work. I'm grateful for it." "That's good," I said. An awkward silence stretched between us, 7 years of silence compressed into one moment. "How are Emily and David?" she asked, her voice breaking. "They're good. Emily has 2 children now. David's getting married next month." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Grandchildren! I have grandchildren!" "Yes," I said. I didn't add that she'd never meet them. She knew. "Robert, she started, then stopped. "I'm sorry.
I know I've said it before. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry every single day. I looked at this woman who destroyed my life, this woman who looked so small now, so broken, and I realized Patricia was right. I really had moved on. Looking at Margaret didn't hurt anymore. It didn't make me angry. I just felt a distant sadness for the waste of it all. I hope you're doing well, Margaret. I hope you found some peace. I turned to leave. Robert, wait, she called out. Are you happy? I looked back at her. Yes, I'm very happy. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Good. That's good. You deserve to be happy. I walked away, leaving her in the cereal aisle. When I got to the car, Catherine looked at me with concern. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I did, in a way. I told her about Margaret. Catherine took my hand. Do you want to talk about it? No, I said, starting the car. Let's go home. And that was the last time I saw Margaret. I heard through James, who heard through mutual acquaintances, that she continued working at that grocery store, that she lived in a small apartment alone, that she tried to reach out to Emily and David through letters, but they'd return them unopened. I didn't judge my children for their choice. They had to heal in their own way, just as I had. 10 years after the trial, Emily asked me to tell my grandchildren about their grandmother. Not Margaret, Catherine. We were sitting in Emily's backyard watching her kids play on the swing set. Little Sophie was 5, Lucas was 3. They called Catherine Grandma Cat and loved her fiercely. They're going to hear things eventually. Kids at school, people in town, the stories still known. I want them to hear the truth from us. What truth? I asked. That bad things happened, that people made terrible choices, but that you survived it, that our family survived it, that we chose love and honesty and built something new. That evening, over dinner, we told the story in simple terms the children could understand, that Grandpa had been married before to someone who made bad choices, that she hurt people and had to go away, that Grandpa met Grandma Cat and they fell in love and built a happy life. Is the bad grandma still in timeout? Sophie asked, her face serious. Emily and I exchanged glances, trying not to smile at her 5-year-old interpretation. She's not in timeout anymore, I said. She's trying to make better choices now, but we don't see her. Because you hurt you? Sophie asked. Yes, because she hurt me and Mommy and Uncle David. She thought about this, her little brow furrowed. Then she climbed into my lap and hugged me tight. I'm sorry the bad grandma hurt you, Grandpa, but I'm glad you have Grandma Cat now. Me too, sweetheart, I said. Me too. Later, after the kids were in bed, David came over. We sat on the back porch, drinking whiskey, looking at the stars. You know, David said, I've been thinking about Mom lately. Oh, I tried to keep my voice neutral. Not in a good way, not in a bad way, just thinking, wondering if I should reach out, not to forgive her, not to have a relationship, just to, I don't know, close the loop? That's up to you, son. There's no right answer. Did it help? Seeing her at the grocery store, did it give you closure? I don't know if closure is a real thing, but it did confirm something I'd already figured out, that she was just a person, not a monster, not a victim, just a person who made terrible choices and has to live with them. David nodded his whiskey. Maybe I'll send her a letter. Nothing dramatic, just letting her know we're okay, that we've moved on. If that's what you need to do, do it. He did send that letter. A brief note saying that he and Emily were doing well, that they didn't want a relationship, but wanted her to know they weren't carrying hatred. Margaret wrote back thanking him. That was the end of it.
15 years after the trial, I stood in the new wing of the children's hospital that bore my name, the Whitmore Pediatric Center. I donated a significant portion of my assets to build it, working with the same charity organization Margaret had once stolen from. "You've more than made up for what she took," Sandra told me at the dedication ceremony. She was retired now, but had stayed involved with the foundation. "I wasn't trying to make up for it," I said. "I just wanted to do something meaningful with what I'd built." Catherine squeezed my hand. We'd been married 10 years now, a decade of happiness, honesty, and genuine partnership. Everything my first marriage had pretended to be. Emily's kids, now teenagers, were there with David's 2 young children, 5 grandchildren, a family Margaret would never know. Did I feel guilty about that sometimes? Yes. Despite everything, there was a part of me that felt sad for her. She'd missed so much. The weddings, the grandchildren, the life that could have been hers if she'd made different choices. But guilt and sadness weren't the same as regret. I didn't regret exposing her. I didn't regret the divorce. I didn't regret rebuilding my life without her. Those choices had led me here, to this happy, genuine life. 20 years after finding that storage unit key, I'm sitting in my study, the 3rd iteration of that room, writing these words. Catherine is in the garden. Our grandchildren's laughter floats through the window. In an hour, we're having a family dinner to celebrate David's youngest daughter's birthday. I'm 75 years old now. I've lived more years after Margaret's betrayal than I lived in the marriage itself. The pain is faded to a distant memory, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore, but reminds you of a wound that once existed. I heard through James that Margaret passed away last year. Heart attack. She died alone in her apartment. Emily cried when she heard. David was quiet for days. They mourned not the woman she became, but the mother they remembered from childhood. I attended the funeral from a distance, standing at the back of the small chapel. There were maybe a dozen people there, co-workers from the grocery store, her parole officer, a few people I didn't recognize. Marcus wasn't there. He was still in prison. As they lowered her casket into the ground, I felt a strange finality. The last chapter of that story was closed. Margaret was gone. The woman who'd betrayed me, who'd tried to destroy me, who'd ultimately destroyed herself, was gone. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt done. I walked back to my car where Catherine was waiting. She didn't ask any questions. She just took my hand as we drove home. That evening, surrounded by my family, I looked around the dinner table and thought about legacy. Margaret's legacy was pain, betrayal, a cautionary tale. But what was mine? I looked at Emily, a successful lawyer who taught her children about honesty and integrity, at David, a fire chief who saved lives and taught his kids about courage, at Catherine, who'd shown me that love didn't have to be complicated or dramatic, that it could be simple and true, at my grandchildren, growing up in a family that valued truth. That was my legacy. Not revenge, not bitterness, but the choice to build something real from the ashes of something false. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed, I want you to know something. The pain you're feeling right now, it's real and it's valid. Don't let anyone tell you to just move on or get over it. Healing takes time. But I also want you to know this. You will survive. The betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do next. Do you become bitter and closed off? Or do you choose to heal, to grow, to eventually open your heart again? I chose to heal. It took years. It took therapy and support from family and friends. It took meeting someone new who showed me what real love looked like. But I chose to heal. And that choice made all the difference. To those who betray, you may think you're being clever. You may think you'll get away with it.
But betrayal always leaves a trail, and the truth always emerges. The question is whether you'll face it with honesty or try to cover it up with more lies. Margaret chose lies, and it cost her everything. To those who've been betrayed and are seeking revenge, be careful. Revenge can consume you. It can make you as cruel as the person who hurt you. My revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about truth. I exposed what she'd done, protected my assets, and then I let the legal system handle it. Then I moved on with my life. That's the best revenge. Living well. Thank you for listening to my story. Please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Share your own stories if you feel comfortable. We heal together. And remember, betrayal is painful, but it's not fatal. You can survive this. You can rebuild. You can find happiness again. I'm living proof. Until next time, this is Robert Whitmore, reminding you that the best revenge is a life well lived.